Welcome everyone to today's weekly web chat from Prairie Public. I'm Darcy Buchhop, and today I'm joined by fourth grade teacher from up in Grand Forks, Melissa, and we're talking all about social emotional learning in the elementary classroom. Welcome, Melissa. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Will you tell us just a little about who you are, where you teach, kind of a little bit of your teaching journey?
So I teach right now fourth grade at Century Elementary School in Grand Forks. This is my 13th or 14th year in the district.
Okay.
I haven't taught the whole time. I started as a para, taught second grade, and kind of like the older kids, so I was happy to move up to fourth grade. I recently got a master's degree in technology, so I do a lot of STEM and that kind of stuff into my classroom, but there's a group of us that we meet regularly. Sometimes in the summer, we throw out different books that we want to read and talk together and stuff. And this was, Being the Change was one of these books that caught someone's attention this last year and was like, hey, we need to read this and talk about this book, because social emotional, it seems like it becomes more and more important every year.
It really does. And whether it's supporting those students and their social emotional learning, building your classroom community, there are so many strands that feel like they connect together into this social emotional learning umbrella. And what is that looking like for you in your classroom? So you have this book. Is it written for adults? Like, who is the target audience?
It is written for teachers, which is really nice.
Okay.
And I think you could make it work at any grade level. I think with some of the younger kids, you'd have to modify it slightly with some of the topics it gets into. But really, we really liked about it is she has lesson plans in here. Like, here's a lesson plan on how you can teach this skill to your students, which is great for busy teachers. So we absolutely loved that aspect of it. And even though I don't follow the lesson plans exactly, it was still nice to see, okay, this is really how I can approach this skill in my class.
So that's great that there's these outlines, and if what she has completely works, fantastic. But otherwise, you can take that as the springboard and at least have some of those topics. Like, what are some of the things that come up in the book to talk about with students?
Well, some of them that, there's always that, knowing who you are and learning about yourself and learning about each other. But some of them that kind of threw us at first, but is like, oh, I never really thought to talk those topics, is biases and microaggressions, and how everyone has these natural biases just based on the way you've been brought up, and how to learn those things about yourself so that you know how to address those and kind of not say the wrong thing or realize that you're making these assumptions. And they were all, even in the beginning of the book, she makes a comment of like, well, why would you even bring this up? Why would you even tackle that? But it's something that our kids do need to learn how, and we do a lot then with how to disagree respectfully, and that there are a lot of different ideas and beliefs and things in our classroom, and that we're not always going to agree on everything, but how do you disagree on a topic respectfully so that you're not hurting each other's feelings or you're not attacking the other person or different things like that.
This is interesting. That example, that very concrete example, for me as a high school English teacher, you were saying these could be adaptable really any grade. I could very much see that, of looking at our biases, microaggressions, and how to have a good argument, like how to disagree with each other, both around how do we facilitate class discussions, but also around our writing of argumentative writing. Because both of those, everything, as you were talking about that, I was like, oh, I could totally see having that conversation, because it's not about saying your biases are wrong.
Right.
It's about making you aware. Are you jumping to this conclusion because of facts and evidence, or because of preconceived notions that you already have? Like, what is causing you to have the opinion that you have? And that's a really powerful conversation for a 10-year-old.
Well, and I think because they're 9 and 10-year-olds, we don't always take it as far as you could with like a high schooler, but
sure.
It was kind of thinking, okay, how do I even approach that at first? Like how even bring that up? But we happened to be, our read aloud was front desk. And I can't off the top of my head think of the author, but I put a picture in the slideshow of the book. Okay. And in that book, something happened and the kids were like, oh, I can't believe they're just assuming that. And I'm like, perfect. Okay, we can jump into this lesson now and we can talk about this. And it came up a lot during this book, these biases of these characters in the book. And then they were able to just kind of have this conversation, and they probably weren't always recognizing their own biases. But then when there has been some conflicts in our class, I've been able to sit down with them and be like, you know, you guys just have to agree to disagree. You believe this, you believe this, and you guys just have to know that neither one of you is wrong. It's just that's what you believe, and you can't attack the other person because of what they believe. So it's been really helpful with those conversations.
And that's a conversation that really does transcend age. So even though we're talking about this for 9 and 10-year-olds and talking about this, these are good topics for everyone. So you've shared this resource, the Being the Change, and you've already shared a little bit of how you use it, but can you talk about that a little bit more? So you were mentioning having some of, like you were reading the book, and then that connected. Will you just talk us through how are you implementing some of the lessons from Being the Change into your classroom?
Well, I think first off, when we started talking about having to really talk more of the social emotional stuff in our classrooms, I honestly, a few years ago, it was, how am I going to fit that in? Like, seriously, how? I mean, because we all feel like that one more thing.
It's one more thing, and I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. Like this, that isn't what I know about.
And so they talked about how they really wanted everyone doing morning meetings to get some of this across. And again, I'm like, really? How am I going to fit that 20, 25 minutes into the day? Because now I'm not. So I like to think I'm a pretty innovative teacher, but I was kind of irritated about having to give up this time in the beginning a few years ago. But once I did that and made it a daily occurrence, it totally made a difference in my classroom. It gave us every day this 20 to 25 minutes where we talked about being a class, being a family, who are you, talking identity, talking out problems, working together, cooperation, like what does it mean to be of this classroom family? And I absolutely saw change in my classroom.
Because what you're talking about there kind of goes back to what I was saying of all these strands of these like hot topics in education, the social emotional learning, building a classroom community. So how has the morning meeting and focusing and being intentional on building your classroom community impacted that academic work that kids are doing in the classroom?
I think it's just they just are treating each other better. You know, you still get the clicks and you still get some of that, but I think at the same time, they still, at least within the classroom, they don't always carry it over to everywhere else, but at least in the classroom, I see less conflict than maybe we had before, and just a better working together, helping each other out, kind of.
Safer to fail.
Yes, there we go. Just that safety, you know. We talk a lot about failure, and that's okay, and it's your first attempt in learning, and that kind of thing.
That growth mindset, another strand coming into here.
Absolutely. And so I think that just that whole concept just across the board and just talking about it every day has really helped the students. And academically, then if they don't get right away, it's okay. Or if they struggled on something, it's okay because we're going to keep coming back to it and we're going to talk about it again, and you're eventually going to learn it. You just maybe didn't learn it immediately.
Yeah.
You know,
That's that phrase from growth mindset that I love, of you just haven't gotten it yet.
right.
It's not that you can't get it or won't get it. And have some of these lessons from morning meeting and these conversations of being the change, you mentioned that some of them are about personal identity. Has that also helped the learning of, like, if students understand themselves and each other a bit more, does that shift their perspective of who they are as learners?
I think so. I think it really helps a lot with like our literacy and some of the stuff we teach through reading. I mean, being the change right at the beginning is about the kids finding out who they are and their identity.
Mm-hmm.
So really, and then later connecting that, okay, what are your character traits and what are you all
Sure.
about? And they had them in their journals and they have it there to keep referring to all school years. So then when we're reading books in our read aloud or in their literature circles and stuff, I think they recognize and identify and empathize with the characters and things a lot more than maybe they had in the past. And for our read alouds, I really try to do read alouds that really have kind of that social impact, really deep conversations. Like they really have to think about and empathize with the characters. And so I think just even those kind of heavier, tough conversation books as read alouds has helped a lot too, with them to kind of open their eyes a little bit outside the classroom walls.
Yeah, this feels like just good scaffolding. Not to get too teacher jargony, but this feels like it's very good scaffolding of, by using this kind of mentor text, you're able to use characters to model different relationships and different experiences. So even though the students haven't maybe had that exact same experience personally, the text becomes a model for a conversation, and then you can now apply these techniques that you've learned, and that building empathy and being able to identify with someone who's very different from you in the book, that's a really huge learning experience to broaden that perspective.
My school is one of the EL kind of hub elementary schools in Grand Forks. So most of the students we have now in our school are kind of that second generation students, but even still, some of these books, when we've read them and stuff, some of those kids are like, "Ooh, my mom," or, you know, they can make those connections that maybe they haven't experienced it, but they have family members who have experienced it. And I think it just gets a conversation going of different pasts and experiences and where your family lives and where your family's from, and those kinds of conversations to help get rid of some of those biases that maybe the kids have.
I've recognized some of those. And there's a lot in the news right now about other people. However you feel about immigration, there is just a lot of information. And I think kids are hearing a lot of things through media, and they might not have the context to process some of that. So I think by having books, that's one of the powers of books, right? You can go to places, you can experience things, you can meet people and hear perspectives that you might not otherwise experience right in Grand Forks. But it sounds like a lot of your students have backgrounds that also connect to these. Would you, Penny Kittle has this technique where she just does like a 30-second commercial. Will you do a 30-second, like, what are these books about?
Okay. So Front Desk is about Chinese immigrants that have moved to the United States. And the parents, you know, they had great jobs over in China, but now that they're here in the United States, you know, they're still learning English. They don't know English. So they're running this hotel for somebody else. And it's just kind of the struggles that they go through adapting to this new life in the United States. And you kind of see how it is a struggle when you don't know English.
Not knowing a language does not mean you're stupid.
Right, absolutely. And then the little girl, then she knows more English, obviously, than her parents, which a lot of the kids do, and just about her experiences in school and things like that. Fish in a Tree is about a girl with dyslexia, and I can't remember the age of the girl in there, but it's like 5th, 6th, 7th grade, something like that. And just being diagnosed with dyslexia. She finally has a teacher who recognizes that she has this disability and then helps her through it. So that was a great book when we read it, just for any kid who's struggling in school, to see that, you know what, you can get through this and you will be okay, kind of a thing. Long Walk to Water is based on a true story, and it goes back and forth between 2 time periods. One is the one main character, Salva. He is one of the Lost Boys of Sudan, and it's his experiences. And then it's, when it was written more present time, I think it's like 2008 or something when that takes place, of another girl in Sudan and what her life is like and how she has to walk to get water twice a day for her family. And that's all I want to give, because it has a great ending, but I want to give it away. But that one is a short, quick read, and the kids absolutely love it. They absolutely love it. Amahl Unbound, that was a global read aloud book this year. And I think it was the upper elementary global read about, and it's a girl in Pakistan. Yes, I'm almost positive it was Pakistan, so I hope I got that right. And she kind of messes up and ends up having to go to be kind of a servant in the home of the person who's kind of running their town, who's overseeing their town. So she went from having this future of, I want to do this and I want to go to college and I want to be a teacher, to being a servant in this home. And it's kind of about keeping hope, and how anybody can stand up to the oppressors and make a difference, kind of.
Nice.
So that was a good one. And then Refugee is one of my absolute favorites, and it's usually a class favorite as well. You really couldn't read it to kids below 4th grade, and even 4th grade, there are parts of the book that I don't always read. I kind of skip over them. But it is 3 refugee stories. One is a family leaving Germany at the beginning of World War II in 1939 on this ship for Cuba. And it's the ship is full of Jewish immigrants who are trying to get out of Germany at the beginnings of World War II. The second immigrant story is 2 families leaving Cuba in 1992 during wet foot, dry foot, and trying to get to Florida in their makeshift boat. And then the last immigration story is, it takes place in Aleppo in 2015, and the family having to leave Aleppo, and they're trying to get to Germany to safety. So it's really interesting reading these stories. And again, especially with the family in the 2015 time, is, again, the parents both had really good jobs. They needed to get out, and all that they went through with, all that, whatever they could carry on their backs, and the struggles that they went through just to get to safety is kind of unbelievable. And it really, the kids really empathize and really get invested in the stories of these 3 characters. And half of my class was in tears at the end during the one story, as I'm also always struggling to get the end of the book out. But
I love that these, just listening to you, because this is how my brain works. My brain also went, "Ooh, my goodness." Each of these, I've been talking a lot with other people about using media to spark inquiry. And so each of these books as a piece of media, any type of text can be used as a piece of media, or a type of text. So these books could very much be sparking students to go and explore content more deeply. And all of them, every one that you just talked, could be used to launch a PBL process, could be used to spark some of these SEL lessons, these social emotional, by connecting inward, but also connecting outward. There's so much potential in these classroom reads. And while this is a conversation about social emotional learning in the elementary school classroom, I think as high school teachers, I think sometimes we forget about the power of a read aloud.
Oh, absolutely. And I think picture books too. I think there's so many wonderful picture books out there to get them thinking and to how to treat each other and how to empathize with each other, and
again, how to model different behaviors.
Do that.
Yeah, how to model, like, so you have all these picture books, and we also have a resource in this slide deck that is just about picture books. You introduced me to this woman, Pernille Rip, and she has these great book lists. So they're all hyper linked in here. And so she has these great chapter books, and she has them organized by different thematic topics and according to her students. So for social emotional learning, she has books to discuss identity and character, 10 books that spark empathy, and more books that spark empathy, books on friendship and loneliness, books to discuss courage.
Her teaching professional development, I've gone twice. If she's ever near anywhere, I highly recommend going, because you learn so much from her, but you leave with an Amazon cart full of books and end up spending lots of money. And she's a middle school teacher and uses these picture books with her middle school students. So, I mean, like you said, even the picture books, I think you can use
transcends
high school to teach these skills, because those kids don't get read to anymore, and they sometimes don't mind getting read to from time to time.
So what might this look like in your classroom? So when I was thinking about this, and because of my bias, I was thinking, like, how would I use a picture book in a high school classroom? And so I have a couple bullet points there about sparking discussions on a difficult topic in a safe environment, modeling behaviors, creating learning stations, start a deeper exploration, kind of that PBL that I talked about.
Yep.
Can you talk about just one of these books and what that looked like in your classroom? Just walk us through, what did the kids experience and what was launched by reading one of these books?
Okay. Well, we started the school year out, and this was a new book. And I actually think I saw it on Instagram or Twitter by following Pernille, but the We Are Welcome, that's the one that I started the school year with our very first morning meeting this year, because I am in a very diverse school. And that book they show so many different nationalities and kids and families in the school, and talks about how we are all different, but we are all the same, and that we are all welcome here in this school and in this classroom. And
this reminds me, last week I spoke to a first grade teacher, and she said her whole theme for this year has been welcome to our neighborhood. And she's been using kind of the Mr. Rogers. So she said every single morning she plays the Mr. Rogers theme song of like, welcome to our neighborhood. And very similar to the feeling that you're describing by using this book. And then she shared some of the different ways that she's used technology to help further that. So we have this song, and she had they created a neighborhood bulletin board with everybody's pictures. And then each kid had a QR code that linked to a Flipgrid video of them introducing themselves. What are the next steps? So you start with a morning meeting, and it doesn't have to be technology, because I don't think that tech is the answer to every activity. But you start in morning meeting and you've read this text.
That's how I launched into our identity, and them all making their identity webs. And so then it was kind of like they decided one of their things off of their identity web was the I am, and then what do you want to share? And so every morning we say good morning to each other. So then for the first few days of school, it was the I am, and then, you could say whatever. So you could say like, I am a sister. or I am a gymnast, or just letting people know. I know one of the other teachers in town, and I know it was an idea in our book from Being the Change, and of course I can't find it at the moment, but one of the other teachers in town who also was a part of this book study this summer, and she's at the other EL Hub school in our district. And so she made a bulletin board, and at open house, she had the kids and the parents do this I am board. And then they just put a word on a sticky note and put it on. So it was the I am, and it had all of these sticky notes of the kids and the parents in her classroom of who they are.
That's very cool. So you can do, I love that. Like, right, it can be sticky notes and pen and paper and hanging it up. It can be this first grade teacher. She shared how she uses Flipgrid to do those introductions and then has QR codes. She also shared that one of her colleagues, another first grade teacher, does basically the web that you're similar, but they do it with Padlet, which is just virtual Post-it notes, but same kind of thing. And it sounded like it was in part because not as many parents made it into the school always. So that's an important factor of knowing your community. Just like you were saying, you don't always read every part of Refugee, the book, because you know your kids and you know what they're going to be able to handle.
And what to skip here and there. Because really, the author writes books. Like if you look up the age for the book, it is middle school, high school age.
Sure.
It's such a wonderful book. And when I read it, last year was the first year I read it to my students, and I knew my students could handle it. Like I knew because of
different cohorts,
other books we had read, and some of the things the kids in my class have been through, like I knew we could handle it. And there were just little pieces that I have marked in my book. So I remember each year that as I'm just reading along,
oh, we're going to skip this paragraph
before I keep going.
Yeah.
But they absolutely love it and can empathize with it.
That's fantastic. Cool. So that, like these nice little sparks. So you use that storybook. We've got morning meetings. Kids are greeting each other. They're building this connection of who they are. This is putting you on the spot a bit, but I found, because of Twitter, I found this infographic, and I wondered what your take as a fourth grade teacher, what your take was on some of these things of how do you talk to your students about their social emotional health? How you've talked about books, but are there other ways that you help model healthy social emotional behavior?
I think, honestly, books are what I do use the most. There's so many wonderful books, and it just springboard into conversations. But I think in those conversations, then they're learning and discussing coping skills, how to build relationships. Sometimes then what has been really helpful is when a conflict does arise in class, I can take those couple kids, we can sit down and have a conversation and talk about and pull back onto some of the things we had been talking about in morning meeting, or our counselor comes in and does lessons. We get 6 or 8 lessons before Christmas, and then 6 or 8 more after Christmas. And again, it's that whole social emotional. So they're getting it from all angles that we can pull from, and
that's great.
It all builds kind of on each other. But I think too, like, just that whole, like, the choice, like you're making these choices and you need to make good choices, and you have a lot of choice in this classroom, and we always have to make sure we are kind of making those choices that are best for you, but also in consideration of the rest of your classmates and things like that.
Well said. Since you mentioned that, it made me think, not that Daniel Tiger is a great resource for fourth grade students. They might kind of go, what are you doing? But this goes back to that good content and good teaching are good teaching. So you could use something, but I want to share just a few additional, like these are amazing books. These are great book lists to help get you started. They're in this slide deck. There are some just general collections of resources for your classroom. And so there is the Daniel Tiger collection. So that's for much younger kids. But in the 4th grade, I could see using something like Daniel Tiger and then having the 4th graders say, all right, like you're going to be working with the kindergartners. We're going to do an activity with a different classroom. And so we're going to start with Daniel Tiger, and then you're going to create an activity to do with the younger kids. And the other one that I think, same thing, I could see some 4th graders, you were talking about, you had a 4th grade class that just because of what they had been through, you knew they could handle something. I think some 4th grade classes would be like, ooh, Arthur, and would be excited. And some would go, ooh, that's super lame. And like, that's for little kids.
Yep.
And so it would really depend.
I've had them both.
Sure. Because they're right at that cusp of like where they could still really like this, but they're trying to be big kids. But there's this lovely AIM Buddy Project curriculum for social, emotional, and character development. And it uses the Arthur characters. There's a full educator's guide and video, and then classroom, like the classroom media, the different videos on empathy, honesty, these different topics. Again, using Arthur. And then when you click on the educator's guide, you'll be able to open this whole PDF of kind of what you were talking about, like your book, Being the Change. A lot of different lesson ideas, contents, like what you can do, the different conversations that can probably not be exactly what you would do in your classroom, but give you a starting point. And it covers a lot of the same. I mean, you can see here, there's chunks on empathy, honesty, forgiveness, generosity, and learning from others. So that's the Little Buddies collection. And then the Bigger Buddies is same thing, empathy, honesty, forgiveness, generosity, and learning from others. So just, these are all free resources. So just a few different collections for you to maybe draw additional resources from. So I think Melissa has shared amazing ideas, like all of these books I could see being, like I said, the start of a whole PBL on social emotional learning and tying into a different topic. And this great book, the Being the Change, has those lessons so you can make those connections. And if you're looking for a few more things, there's just a few more media resources in those learning media collections. I have one more question for you about, we've been talking all of these things of like, how do we help support students? You've talked about being able to have side conversations, how morning meeting is really, it sounds like the foundation of your social emotional work, like that you're building this community. You've got these lessons, you've got these books that help model and spark and start those conversations. What do you do for you?
Well, I have to make sure I take time for me. Because I teach all of this to my students, and then it's like, oh, you know, I forgot to apply it to myself. So
exactly. I'm looking at that infographic going, oh yeah, like we're supposed to role model. You talked about using those books. We're supposed to talk. You talked about how you get the kids to do these different activities, the coping skills. But how often am I doing some of these things? How often am I focusing on my own sleep, my own relaxation, my own self-care? How much am I paying attention to how healthy my relationships are?
Right. I really try to make time for exercise. Now, these last few weeks have been crazy busy, so I totally got
wet
again and need to get back on. But
okay.
I think one of the best things I did, but once I had kids especially, is like I kind of decided I'm going to bring minimal to nothing home at night, and that because when I get home, it has to be my family. And so I've really learned over the years that, you know, it's okay if every paper doesn't get graded, and it's okay to leave some stuff at work, and some things don't have to be done immediately. And I've even just figured out ways like math in my classroom, since I know the curriculum so well now, I've got that, you know, 20-minute lesson down, work time the rest of the time where they can come, I correct, they fix, we get it all done in math time, so that I'm not taking a stack of math papers home or different things like that. And that like I leave as much as I possibly can at school, and then at home is at home time for my family. And I think that was huge to realize you don't have to take everything home at night. It's okay to have a life outside of school, and it's okay if it has to wait a day.
Yeah.
You know, it was kind of important.
That's a hard lesson of, because we are dedicated as teachers. We're dedicated to those kids who are sitting in that room. Like, that classroom community is very important. But yeah, I think you're exactly right. If you're not taking care of you, because that sounds like you're creating space for relationships at school as well as relationships at home. And if you weren't doing that, it's all going to suffer. Like, you can only do that so long. But it also sounds like you've built in some good systems within the school day to help support that. Like, when you prioritize that, it can trickle, so you can figure out ways to make that work. And I love that exercise. Like, that's a great, like, whether you think of that as well-being or as relaxation or self-care, it's kind of all three.
Mm-hmm. And I know, like, some work, like, you can't avoid, like, our district, we have a Monday night Twitter chat.
Yeah.
And it's almost every week. So that, you know, it's still work at home, but it's not until 8:30 at night. So usually my kids are in bed by then. And if my youngest is not asleep yet, she'll just say, Mom, can you have your chitter chat while you sit in my room?
Your chitter chat.
And I'm like, yes, I can come sit on your bed. And so, and that's nice too, because you're not on video, so you can be in your jammies. I can sit on their bed and do PD with other teachers in town, which it's nice because even though we have different topics every week, just hearing from other teachers, and you just kind of go, oh, like, I don't feel stressed and overwhelmed after a Twitter chat like you do sometimes when you sit through PD with the district. It's sure. Even though ideas are thrown out there and conversations are being had, some of them, it's just like we're able to just get information out and talk with one another. And that's just kind of relaxing.
And throw out ideas.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
When you were just describing that, it's like your morning meeting.
Yes.
But for teachers. And like, think about that. Think of all the time and care that we as teachers set up to create this vibrant classroom community where students feel safe to fail, where students feel like they have support from each other and from us as their instructor. And we spend all of this time, and you're giving over 20 minutes every single morning in order to like build that foundation. Mm-hmm. And yet, do we have that foundation for ourselves? Are we creating that foundation and that safety to fail with each other as colleagues? I don't think that we do. And again, I should just own this and say this for myself. I don't think that I was always the best at doing that for myself with my colleagues in the same way that it was very natural for me to do that with my students and for my students. And yet I didn't have the same respect to do that for myself. So thanks for sharing that. When does that chat happen? You said
it's usually every Monday night at 8:30. And it's hashtag GF Ed Chat is what our Ed Chat is. I know there are some
non-GF teachers
when people join in.
Yeah, and that's really cool. So a nice reminder of if that person doesn't happen to be in your building, if you don't have that cheerleader, if you don't have that like-minded educator down the hall from you or in your building, that's okay. But you're not alone. So I like that idea of being able to connect via something like Twitter and help and find those people who are like-minded educators and can be your cheerleaders and give you ideas that support the type of teaching and learning practice that you're trying to facilitate.
And I think, I've been on Twitter maybe 4 years now.
Okay.
And I've learned more on Twitter than anything else that I have ever sat through. I follow educators. And I have learned so much over Twitter. So it's been a great PLN. I love it.
That's great. Yeah, not to be too much sorry for the mini Twitter commercial, but really all of this is just about that self-care. Yeah, and the whole, like you said this, but really it is, we need to be our best so that we can support them in the difficult journey of being 10 years old. Like, we need to be the best versions of ourselves, and that's very much how I approached every single day. I need to be the best me possible. Some days were better than others.
Yep.
But I need to be the best me possible when I'm with these kiddos, because they deserve it, first and foremost. And they need it. They need me. They need us.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing. I'm going to have to check out Being the Change. In addition to, I mean, that it is the quote, right? Be the change.
With books.
Yeah, right. I'm going to have, and then all of those other books that you just did your little commercials for, I'm going to be spending a lot of money here in the next couple of weeks. But it is that, like, we need to be the change we want to see in the world. So it's a nice riff off of that great quote. And just a reminder to, create the social emotional learning space that your students need. Thanks for all of your tips and ideas on how we might accomplish that in our classrooms.
Well, thank you. I enjoyed this.
Good. All right. We'll see you guys next time on our next web chat.